Welcome back, Keyforgers. In this episode, we're going to look at a deck that I played in a Mass Mutation sealed tournament at D20, which is a board game cafe in Watford. We're going to go through the deck, and then I'm going to show you how I look through and analyze a deck with the limited time you get during a sealed tournament. Let's close up of the Archon for you, and we have Untamed, Logos, and Saurians. The Doctor of Keywood. I was so hoping it would be Keyforge, but it wasn't. Bottom card coming out, turning over. We're starting out with Logos. We have Autoencoder, which is an artifact. It's got a capture enhancement on it. After a card is discarded from your hand, archive the top card of your deck. Bot Bookton, 4 power, also has a capture enhancement. Reap, play the top card of your deck. Diametric Charge is an action. You get an amp when you play it. Play. Deal 1 damage to a creature with 2 damage splash. Effervescent Principle is an action. It's got a capture enhancement. Play. Each player loses half their amber, rounding down the loss. Gain 1 chain. Lethalogica is an action. You get an amp when you play it. Play. Discard cards from the top of your deck until you discard a Logos card or run out of cards. If you discard a Logos card this way, put it into your hand. Quixo the Adventurer, 3 power skirmish. Fight, draw a card. Titan Engineer, 6 power. While Titan Engineer is not on a flank, keys cost +1 amber. Forge Compiler is an artifact. After your opponent forges a key, destroy Forge Compiler and ward each friendly creature. Mutagenic Serum is an artifact. You get an amp when you play it. It has the Omni ability of destroy Mutagenic Serum. You may use friendly mutant creatures this turn. Professor Tarato, 4 power. Each mutant creature gains Reap, draw a card. Reverse Time is an action. You get an amp when you play it. Play. Swap your deck and your discard pile. Then shuffle your deck. Sacrobot, 5 power, 2 armor. Reap. Discard a card from your hand. If you do, draw a card. On to Saurians. We're starting out with Chant of Hubris is an action. You get an amp when you play it. Play. Move 1 amber from a creature to another creature. Consul Primus, 3 power. It put a capture enhancement in the deck. Reap, move 1 amber from a creature to another creature. Cornerstone Octavia, 5 power, 1 armor, action, capture 2 amber. Force the Great, 4 power. Your opponent's keys cost +1 amber for each friendly creature with amber on it. Play, you may exalt a friendly creature. Galeatops, 12 power. It only deals 4 damage when fighting. A second Galeatops. Spores of Battle is an action. You get an amber when you play it. Play. A friendly creature captures 1 amber. Each creature with amber on it captures 1 amber from its opponent. Blast from the Past is an action. Play. Exalt a friendly creature. Archive a Saurian creature from your discard pile. Deal damage equal to the archived creature's power to an enemy creature. Dark Centurion, 5 power. It put 2 capture enhancements in the deck. Action. Move 1 amber from a creature to the common supply. If you do, ward that creature. Dreadbone Decimus, 5 power. It has been enhanced with an amber pip. Play, fight. You may exalt Dreadbone Decimus. If you do, destroy a creature with lower power than Dreadbone Decimus. Library of Polyosaurus is an artifact. Action. Move 1 amber from a friendly creature to your pool. Legion's March is an action. You get an amber when you play it. Play. For the remainder of the turn, after you use a dinosaur creature, deal 1 damage to each non-dinosaur creature. And finally, on to Untamed. We're starting out with Dark Fairy, 2 power with an enhanced amber pip. It has Skirmish, Fight, gain 2 amber. Ghost Hawk, 2 power with Deploy. Play, you may reap with each neighbouring creature 1 at a time. Gloriana's Attendant, 1 power. It put 2 amber enhancements in the deck. Keyfrog, 2 power, destroyed, forge a key at current cost. Pismire, 4 power. While there are more friendly mutant creatures than enemy mutant creatures, your opponent's keys cost +2 amber. Reclaim by Nature is an action. You get an amber when you play it. Play, purge an artifact. Resolve its bonus icons as if you had played it. Song of the Wild is an action. Play, for the remainder of the turn, each friendly creature gains Reap, gain 1 amber. Bumblebird, 1 power alpha. Play. Put 2 +1 power counters on each other friendly untamed creature. Growth Surge is an action. You get an amp when you play it. Play. Give a flank creature 3+1 power counters. Give its neighbour 2+1 power counters. Give the second creature's other neighbour a +1 power counter. Mushroom with a View is an artifact. You get an amp when you play it. Omni ability, heal 1 damage from each friendly creature. Trimble 3 power, each mutant creature gains Skirmish. Ritual of the Hunt is an artifact. You get an amp when you play it. Omni ability, destroy Ritual of the Hunt. For the remainder of the turn, you may use friendly untamed creatures. Okay, there we have it. When you attend a sealed tournament, you get given a specific amount of time to look through your deck, familiarise yourself with the cards, try and think about how it's going to play, and then sleeve it and be ready to start when the rounds are announced. Now in this tournament, we got 10 minutes. It doesn't usually take 10 minutes, but I'll go through today my process. I'll slow it down a bit. There'll be some chopping and changing, but once you've done it a few times, you sort of get used to what you're looking for. So the first thing I do is I look at how many amber pips are there in the deck. So there, as you can see, there are 13 amber pips in the deck. 2 of those were enhanced. And what you've got to look at is how often are you going to play these cards when they're in your hand. So the majority of these cards you could probably play even if you just need the amber. There are not many you are going to hold on to, and probably only 1 or 2 that you would not want to play. So reverse time, play, swap your deck and discard pile, then shuffle your deck. Yes, you can do it any time, but if you're looking to get specific cards into your deck that are in your discard pile, you kind of want to action it when you've got 4, 5, or just a few cards in your discard pile, knowing that you're going to draw into them over the next turn or 2. So it wasn't a card that I played whenever it was in my hand. The other things you have to look for are artifacts. So we've got 3 artifacts here. So once these artifacts are on the board, they're not going to be cycling around your deck unless you need to destroy them to trigger a certain effect. So things like Ritual of the Hunt and Mutagenic Serum, they're destroyed, so they will cycle, but they might be on your board for a few turns before you use it. Mushroom with a View will remain in play unless it's taken out of play. It's got fantastic Omni ability, and during my games I was actually using it every single turn. Then we look at the other cards. So Diametric Charge, direct damage. You have 2 creatures here that will both enhance with amber pips. So creatures with amber pips are quite nice because they don't usually happen. There aren't that many creatures that have amber pips on them as a standard. The actions, you had 2 in Logos, 3 in Saurion, and 2 in Untamed. The Growth Surge was quite good, you could always play that. The Reclaim by Nature, it was nice having artifact control in the deck, and when I saw that I was like, yes, I'm quite happy, because the worst thing is in a sealed tournament, if your opponent's got one of those artifacts like Redacted, and you don't have a way to take it off the board, you're on a timer. The Saurion cards mainly dealt with moving amber around and capturing amber. The Spoils of Battle works for yourself and your opponent, so if your opponent has creatures with amber captured onto them, they will capture your amber as well. Legion's March, for the remainder of the turn, after you use a dinosaur creature, deal 1 damage to each non-dinosaur creature. Now, when we have a look at the creatures, you'll see that I do have 2 Saurions, which are beasts and not dinosaurs, and when I first saw this card, I misread it for when you play a dinosaur creature. So I did get tripped up by that in one of my games. The 2 Logos actions, Lethalogica and Diametric Charge. Lethalogica is really good. I used it to fish for a specific action out of the deck that I will talk through in a minute. But that is the Amber Pip cards for this deck. Next, I tend to break it down into creatures, actions, artifacts, and upgrades. So there was no upgrades in the deck, but the artifacts, we had quite a few. There were 6 artifacts in the deck. We saw the Ritual, the Mushroom, and the Serum. The other ones we did have was an auto encoder that got one of those capture enhancements. After a card is discarded from your hand, archive the top card of your deck. This was very useful, especially when I had dead cards in my hand that I didn't want to play. I could discard them and just put cards into my archives and then redraw up at the end of the turn. It did add some speed to the deck. We had a Forge Compiler. After my opponent forges a key, if it is in play, destroy it and it will award each friendly creature. I did pull this off twice. It's quite good because if you know your opponent's going to forge and you can't take them off, or you kind of don't want to take them off because you've got a big board, you might have the advantage, you might have a key lead. Dropping the Forge compiler did help. And then Library of Polyosaurus. Action, move 1 amber from a friendly creature to your pool. So with the capture we've got in the deck, this was quite helpful in lowering the amount of amber that my opponent could claim back, and I was obviously able to put it into my pool. As for the actions, the untamed actions in this deck I didn't use that much. Song of the Wild, I never really had an untamed board. My untamed creatures were very low power, they usually didn't survive. Sometimes I was actually just discarding them to put cards in my archive because I wanted to draw more into my Saurian and Logos cards. Growth Surge did work a couple of times. Just bear in mind that if you don't have a battle line, it does work on your opponent because it says give a flank creature. So if you don't have one and your opponent does, you're boosting up your opponent's creatures. We had Reclaim by Nature, as we've talked about. In one of my games, I think it was the last game I played, it got Infernused. So I couldn't help that, but luckily my opponent didn't really have any decent artifacts. If we go into Logos, we've talked about the Reverse Time, the Diametric Charge and the Lethalogica. The only other Logos action we had was the Effervescent Principle. And yes, it did have a capture enhancement on there too, which actually did help because when you play this card, each player loses half their amber, rounding down the loss. If you can take 1 away from your opponent before, there is a chance that they can actually lose more amber from this rounding down. You do gain 1 chain, but it is one of those cards that I did try, especially in 2 of my games, to reverse time back. So after playing it, I'd switch my deck and discard pile, and thankfully there was only a few cards, and my opponent knew it was coming up, and it was just nice to have scaling amber control in the deck. With the Saurians, we've already looked at the Chant of Hubris, the Spoils of Battle and the Legion's March. The other one we had was Blast from the Past. When you play it, you have to exalt a friendly creature, not something I was keen on doing because of not being able to get that amber quickly off my creatures, but you get to archive a Saurian creature from your discard pile, and then you can deal damage equal to the archive creature's power to an enemy creature. I can tell you now, I never used it. It never came up in a situation where I could. Most of the time my Saurian creatures were on the board. If we look at creatures, which was the majority of our deck, we'll start with the Logos because that had the least number of creatures. That was 5. We had the Sacrobot, Reap, discard a card from your hand if you do draw a card. 5 power, 2 armor. It was a nice hefty body, which is not usually something you would associate with a Logos house. Bot Bookton, 4 power with that capture enhancement. Reap, play the top card of your deck. I did at one time manage to do a sneaky reverse time to Reap and play the Effervescent Principle to take my opponent off check. We had the Titan Guardian, 6 power, and if it's not on a flank, all keys, yours and your opponent's, cost +1. That did come in very handy. And then Quicksow the Adventurer, 3 power skirmish, fight, draw a card. Having a fight ability on a skirmish character means it's always going to come off unless you run into something hazardous. So drawing that card did help speed up the deck. And then finally we had Professor Tarato, 4 power. Each mutant creature gains Reap, draw a card, which is really good if you have a board full of mutants, but this was a mass mutation sealed tournament, so everyone was playing mass mutation. I did discard it a couple of times because it was more beneficial for my opponent than it was for me. If we look at the Saurians, we had some big Saurians. We had the 2 Galeatops, and I didn't manage to get the Blast from the Past to work with either of those because the majority of the time they stayed on the board. They only deal 4 damage when fighting, but even if your opponent doesn't do any damage to them, if you attack into 3-4 power creatures, you can take out before it leaves the board. So a very nice creature to sort of beef up the battle line, and I was capturing a majority of the amber onto those 2 creatures. We had the Consul Primus, 3 power, it put a capture enhancement in the deck. Reap, move 1 amber from a creature to another creature. This was great for getting that captured amber off my creatures onto my opponents that I was going to run into on that turn or next turn. The Cornerstone Octavia, 5 power, 1 armor, action capture 2. Only really saw play in my last game where we kind of had similar decks and there was a lot of amber being captured both sides. I think we ended up at the end of like 23 amber on creatures at the end of the game. Force the Great, 4 power. Opponent's keys cost +1 amber for each friendly creature with amber on it. Again, I don't think many of my opponents forged for 6. I think I made them work for it. And then we had two cards which kind of comboed well together, along with one of the artifacts. So let's just have a look at them now. Dreadbone Decimus, 5 power. It had that enhanced Amber Pip. Play or fight ability. You may exalt it. If you do, you destroy a creature with lower power than Dreadbone Decimus. So one of the good things was I could fight with it. If I survived the fight, and usually I ran into something that I could kill, I could then exalt it. So in turn, taking out 2 creatures for 1 fight ability and having that dinosaur on the board was pretty effective. Now, when you pair it with Dark Centurion, 5 power, it put 2 capture enhancements in the deck, but the action on this is move 1 amber from a creature to the common supply. If you do, ward that creature. It did mean that my Dreadbone Decimus was always fighting whilst warded. When I exalted it, I then moved the amber from Dreadbone Decimus to the common supply and warded it again. So it was a nice little combo I had, and then when Dark Centurion left, I always did have the Library of Polyosaurus as backup to get that amber off. If we look at Untamed, which is a house where I didn't have that many creatures in play in any of the games, we had the Gloriana's Attendant, which put 2 amber pips in the deck. We also had the Bumblebird. Now, Bumblebird was alpha, and when you play it, you put 2+1 power counters on each other friendly Untamed creature. I think I did it once. It's an alpha card, and usually if you're calling Untamed, you don't have, well, I didn't have Untamed creatures on the board, so it was no effect. I did discard it a couple of times with the auto encoder in play. We had the Dark Fairies with the other enhanced Amber Pip. 2 power, Skirmish, again with a fight ability of gain 2. This is pretty much taken out as soon as it hit the board. I think it managed to pop off a couple of times over the 4 games that we played. We had a Ghost Hawk, 2 power with that deploy. You may reap with each neighbouring creature 1 at a time. Very good for reaping out of house. There weren't that many reap abilities within my deck. The Conjural Primus was quite nice to reap out of turn with. Then I had one card that was a little bit meh, and I didn't play it in any of my games, I don't think. And it was the Trimble. 3 power, each mutant creature gains Skirmish. A lot of my creatures had Skirmish anyway. Because we was playing Mass Mutation, my opponent did have mutants, and I didn't really want to give them the upper hand of Skirmish. So Trimble was discarded, and it never saw play. Then I had the Pismir, 4 power. While there are more friendly mutant creatures than enemy mutant creatures, my opponent's keys cost +2. This was not always a given. Usually I found myself fighting in to try and take out my opponent's mutants. Again, the same thing with Terato, but it was helpful a couple of times to raise my opponent's key costs. And then I had the Key Frog. 2 power, when it's destroyed, forge a key at current cost. Now, there wasn't really a way I could destroy it in the turn I played it. So it did have to remain on the board. What I did manage to do was key cheat out my last key in the first game I played. All the other games, it was either taken out too early or I just didn't draw into it in time for it to be effective. There were a couple of cards that as soon as I saw them, I felt a lot more happier about playing it in sealed, and I'll just put those out for you now. So these were the cards where when I saw them I was like, great, that gives me a big advantage. We had artifact control, I had scaling amber control, so no matter what amount of amber my opponent had, most of the time I could take them off check unless they ramped up to like 20, 30 amber. And then the Key Frog, which was obviously the key cheat. So they're the things that when you find them in a sealed deck you feel a little bit more happy about. The other thing I liked was the Force the Great and the Pismire. Anything that was going to make my opponent pay more for their keys. Overall, I won the first game, lost the second game, lost the third game, and won the fourth game. So I went 2-2, which wasn't too bad. I feel that my deck was pretty good compared to most Mass Mutation decks that are opened. It's just the 2 I lost against. One of them had something like 21 enhancements in it, and the other one had Infernus, Board Control. I think I lost to a Mark of Dis, which is deal 2 damage to a creature. If it is not destroyed, your opponent must choose that creature's house next turn, which prevented me from Effervescent Principling them off check. I was quite happy to play it in a sealed. If you want to have a close look at the deck, I'll leave the Master Vault link in the description. All that remains for me to say is good luck, have fun, keep forging.